Hi, my name is Gary Napier, and I'm keen to introduce to you our new podcast focusing on couple relationships named Great Expectations. Now, why Great Expectations? Because for many of us, we have the dream of meeting somebody, falling in love, and then spending the rest of our lives together with this person. And what we often realize sooner or later is that the reality is much harder. And so Nick Thiel, my colleague and dear friend, who's a relationship coach, and myself, who specializes in relationship counseling and therapy, have come together to create this podcast on a weekly basis to help you navigate your relationship in order to achieve whatever you set as great expectation. And we're kicking off with Divorce Monday. Doesn't sound very positive, but the reason why is because the first Monday in January is often when solicitors are contacted by one partner or partners to say they want to dissolve their relationship. Or outside of that, people will say, who are not married, communicate to their partner that they're done and we've got through the Christmas period, but I no longer want to spend the rest of my life with you. And the purpose of this particular podcast is to help you to prevent a breakup. And if you've explored all the possible solutions and you're still at a dead end, then how to end well. So really hope that this podcast will help you. If it does and you need further help and professional guidance, please see the contact details below. And also, please remember to like and subscribe. I really hope this blesses you. Right, we know that a lot of couples have great times over Christmas. We did a podcast just before, but we also know it's a real testing and challenging time. And whilst it's not official, this Divorce Monday, it's arguably recognised as the first Monday in January is Divorce Monday, where couples or individuals will contact their family lawyer and say, I want to divorce. Essentially, they're saying, I'm done. Why is that?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? Because it's not a typical New Year resolution
No.
or a goal for the year.
Yeah.
And I often wonder the same because, as you say, it's not official, but you do hear it a lot, and you speak to solicitors, and they probably get the most queries in January.
Yeah.
Good time to find some bargains on the property market when you're having to sell up if you're
You
that way
capitalist.
inclined. But yeah, and I think in my mind, I just think, is it because couples have spent the last week, 2 weeks actually with each other, and it's a break from the usual routine of the year. And a lot of the time during the year, I think everyone's running at 100 miles an hour. You're busy with work, you're busy with the children if you've got children, you're busy with life. And then Christmas comes, you take a week, you take 2 weeks off work, you're all around each other. Um, I think we probably spoke last time about the stresses that go on top of that, the
Yeah.
financial burdens of Christmas, the in-laws, the outlaws, and all the other
Yeah.
laws that come into play. And I think this kind of creates a melting pot of potential trouble. But on the other side, I don't think it's actually anything to do with Christmas. I think Christmas is just that time of reflection, maybe, and people starting to think, what do I want? Do I want the same next year that I've had this year? And maybe that's going on in a lot of people's minds.
Yes, I support that, and particularly from relationship counselling and coaching. The Christmas period you spend in an extended period of time together, as opposed to a normal weekend, Friday to Sunday evening, it brings it to a head. So it's during a busy life throughout the year, you're avoiding it.
Yeah.
And Christmas always, you can't avoid this now. And all the things that you've been carrying subconsciously and consciously is now starting to rise to the surface. And then it's a challenge of putting on a good show or a good face with your family and the children for Christmas. And you just like, I can't do this. I'm
Yep.
exhausted and I'm not going through this again. And with a lot of couples, I find that the divorce breakup is a symptom of that we know there's something that's going wrong or things that are going wrong. And it could be long-term issues or it could be recent. But essentially, they feel that there's no answer to this problem, or my problem's unique, or this is not going to change, or I can't be bothered to put the effort in.
Mm.
And therefore, it's like, right, the easiest, probably disrespectful, but the most practical way to go forward is to depart. Do
Mm.
you find that when you're working with your couples?
Yes, I think the other thing I found though, bro, was that let's step it back a little bit, and it ties in with something I read the other day. Was the when a relationship comes to an end, it's instigated, I think somewhere around 80% of the time by the woman, which I thought was a fascinating statistic.
Yeah.
But then I think this, what happens in January, if it's January or any other time, to cry for help. And it's when one of them, and by the sounds of it, majority times the woman has got to the end of her kind of level of wanting change, expecting change, hoping for change. Maybe that's the word hope. They've run out of hope.
Yeah.
And so they throw their last, it's almost like the last card. I can't think of the phrase, but it's that this is the last thing I can come up with is let's break up, let's get a divorce, because nothing else has triggered the change that they were hoping for. And as you say, it's often a culmination of things. It's very rarely one thing blows up over Christmas and that's it. It's the tip of the iceberg, and it's the last straw on the camel's back. Forgetting all my phrases this morning.
Yeah.
Not enough coffee. But I think that's potentially what's going on. And I question half the time whether it's actually what they want, or whether they just think maybe this will create some change in our situation. What do you think? Would you align with that?
Yeah, totally. It is. I totally agree with you saying it is a cry for help. It is help, and they don't know where to get it from. People still are very slow at reaching out for outside support from a professional.
Yeah.
And so therefore this is what they've got within their control, but they don't want this to continue anymore. And it's that typical where we've been, most of us experienced at some stage in a relationship whereby you get to that crossroad and you say, where do we go from here? Whether it's the children leaving the home, or whether it's after an affair or something that's caused a disruption in the relationship, and we've sat there and you think, right, where do we go from here? And many people now are thinking that, whether it's an individual or both couples, are thinking, what do we do now? We've just got through the Christmas period. I don't want to enter 2025, the rest of the remainder of the year like this, but I don't know the answer. And that's really what people are looking for. I know I'm aware of the symptoms, or I may even know the problems, and I may be looking for the cause of the problems, but I definitely don't believe or know what the answer is. And you're looking at the partner, you may be thinking, you're not the answer for me, essentially.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's really interesting. You talk about a crossroads, and I wonder how many kind of exits there are at that. So you're kind of at a junction, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I wonder how many different exits, what are the different possibilities of where could we go from here? Because typically, I feel like the typical play is someone, 80% of the time, the woman says, I want out, I'm done. And that causes a reaction that typically means that relationship probably is now done. Because I think that just creates I don't know what it's doing, but it very rarely creates a comeback. And perhaps that's a reaction. So if my partner said that to me, perhaps my reaction, and this was probably how my first marriage ended, is kind of, right, okay, we're done. Because you're probably, as the opposite person, you're probably thinking, I've tried to do everything. I don't know what else to do. So now you're saying you're giving up, right? Well, I'm done too. And I'm not sure that's the right option. I'm not sure it's what the person wants when they have that cry for help. But I feel like that's the typical response to that kind of plea at that time.
Yes, two responses to that. I do hear from the female partners and also the men whereby they have thrown that card and said, I'm done. And deep down, they want the man to fight for the relationship. And the man, as you said, accepts it. And when they're looking back and wondering why, if they've got children together, why their ex is giving them a hard time. And I often say, well, because they feel rejected and hurt by you. You didn't fight for them. So therefore, this is their way of releasing some of the pain back to you that you've given to them.
Yeah.
And naturally, there's going to be a reason why they didn't fight for, whether they just didn't know or whether they didn't feel the relationship enough. But it's, you don't want me enough. And secondly, I would say there are also a number of men, I know the statistics at 80%, who want to exit a relationship, but feel financially trapped. And we cannot ignore finances, whereby how much is it going to cost me to leave this relationship?
Yeah.
And the woman thinks that as well. They may feel that the husband, in many cases, controls the purse string, so I cannot leave. And the guy's thinking, well, if I do divorce, it's going to cost me this. So the finances
100%.
Hopefully or not, is what's keeping them there, but it's just causing that bitterness and anger. I'm tied to you. I feel like I'm in
Yep.
prison.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right, bro. And I think, we live in a day and age now where finances are probably a lot more equalized than they used to be, between the man and the woman in
Yeah,
a relationship. And so women probably do have more options financially to make that call. Whereas 20, 30, 40 years ago, maybe they came out with that call a lot less because they really felt tied in. But you're right, finance is a massive kind of fear factor when it comes to a divorce, as is the the children. And I wonder whether a lot of men also fear how their relationship with their children will be affected if they go down the divorce path.
yeah,
Because we would know that typically in particularly in the UK, the children are likely to stay with the mum. And in that scenario, as you said, even if she instigated it, there's hurt.
yeah,
And hurt often leads to reactions that often are using the children as a weapon.
yeah.
And we can sit here and debate that, but we see it happen a lot, and we know about it. And that will be a man's big fear. Will she stop me having a relationship with my children? So shall I live in this relationship to ensure that I'm still around my children?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and that's why typically when the children didn't leave, the chance of that marriage or relationship continuing is very slim.
Mm,
So
mm.
I've done my job. Forgo, let you go.
Exactly.
Life. I completely
Children
done
leave.
that. Yeah,
Financial pressures are eased because
yeah.
you no longer got that worry. Maybe they're through uni, whatever it is. Yeah, and suddenly we start making decisions from a very different perspective.
And as we're saying, no, we don't get here overnight, whether it's in a personal romantic relationship or in a work business context. And I find that the common reason why people get to this stage, and typically it comes out in January, but it comes out throughout other months of the year also, like in terms of how did we get here, is the avoidance of either one partner or both to have uncomfortable, difficult conversations.
Mm,
And people just feel, oh, ignore it, ignore it, ignore it. And you cannot ignore it because it will, rise and rise. But you find
yeah,
that when you hear it in a counselling, you think, this could have been solved, or this could have been this. And the other partner's thinking, but why didn't you say?
yeah,
But I don't want to talk about it, or that comes from your personal background. If you came from a home whereby you didn't have difficult conversations, you didn't confront, then you will likely to take that into your marriage.
yeah, 100%, 100%. Difficult conversations are the key, but they only work if communication works.
Yeah.
And I think that the fear of difficult conversations stems from the way that a couple have communicated throughout their marriage. And at some point, one of them has probably decided, I'm not even going to bring that up because I know what reaction it will cause. I know how they
Yeah.
respond to that. And so actually, you've almost got to strip it back and say, if we can get better at communicating the tough stuff and handling or regulating our emotions during those times, then we can bring in the conversations that can make a massive difference. But I think there's a big fear as to how each person in a relationship responds to certain communication, certain conversations.
And the reality is, when we even attempt to have a difficult conversation, it's difficult when it's just you and your partner because
Mm,
immediately, as soon as you hear something that you don't like, you're ready to respond and emotions are
mm,
rising. So
mm.
much is getting lost. And then one partner's like to say, oh, forget it, or that's why I don't bother speaking. That's why this is no point. Oh, you always react like this. Oh, I knew you was going to say that. And it goes nowhere. So then you
Yeah,
think, this is hopeless. And this is not me promoting seeing a therapist. But when there's another person who's neutral, who's not biased in any way, where you've got that space where it's controlled, you can be heard. And I see so many times where people just think, I just need to be able to say that. I need
yeah,
a safe space to be able to speak without being shut down. Or
yeah,
they'll come and say, I've never had a voice before. It's never sort of very rarely correct, but that's how they're feeling.
yeah,
And that it doesn't have to be a professional, it could be a family member or friend, but I think because we've lost that community, and normally with a friend, they like to be biased towards one partner more than the other. So immediately the
mm,
other person thinking, oh, I knew you take their side. Yeah. So it's very
yeah,
difficult, but
yeah, absolutely.
the the hope is in in the right space, should we say, they can be addressed. those
Yeah.
difficult sort of conversations going to be happening. It'd be like having a 20-year, 30-year career and not to expect to have a difficult conversation at work. So we accept it at work, but we often sometimes shy away from it in our personal relationships.
100%. And I was reflecting on this a couple of days ago. I think I was listening to a podcast actually, and it made me think kind of those thoughts. And it's yeah, the ego is at risk, isn't it? The ego is at risk far more in a relationship than it probably is at work, and perhaps that's the problem. And I think if we looked at the typical communication patterns between couples, a difficult conversation often feels like a criticism. And the typical person, when they feel criticized, either defends heavily or attacks. And either of
Yeah,
those two responses is going to create a negative response in the other person. So I get it. And I think, to your point, I agree that a third party can make a massive difference. Ultimately, I'd love to see couples get better at doing difficult conversations between them on their own.
yeah,
It's doable. I can honestly sit here and say it's doable because
yeah,
I do it.
yeah,
And the irony being when you are able to have difficult conversations and you can do it without the wrong reactions, and you create what you, as you said, it's a safe environment. Everyone wants to feel heard and feel safe to be heard.
yeah,
That's the key. Whether you're a man or a woman, that's the key.
yeah,
And when you can do that with your partner, your relationship goes even deeper. So avoiding them, you're actually staying at a level that you could go way deeper than that in your relationship if you could just do the work to get to that point where you could comfortably, or not comfortably, but handle those conversations.
yes. And a critical point you mentioned, I was thinking about this prior to us speaking today, is that word ego. And in a business, and I do compare relationships to business, that there's times whereby, okay, you're more focused on what does the business need. In a
Mm,
relationship, it very much comes back down to, well, what do I need?
mm,
As opposed to what does this relationship need? So in terms of when we're looking at people, couples thinking, how did we get here? It's looking at, okay, what were the symptoms or the problems that's caused us to get here? What have we ignored? And the second part is like, what do we need to do for the sake of the relationship? And then it takes the pressure off the ego because it's not about you did this or I did that or you never do that. It's about this is where the relationship's at. And often introduce the SWOT analysis, which I know you're familiar with, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I
yeah,
say approach it from the position of the relationship, not John and Sue,
yeah,
because that
100%.
becomes very, very personal. But you think, okay, this is where the relationship's lacking, communication. Right, what do we need to do to address this so we can improve certain strengths? And it just
Yeah,
takes that, it becomes less, you feel less attacked or personal.
yes. Yeah, I think that's gold, bro, to be honest, because when you think about it, we started off talking about how when your kids are at home, it's kind of like a common thing. You two
Yeah,
focusing on the kids. The relationship, if you're not careful, yes, it becomes you against your partner
yeah,
in what you both need from that relationship. But as you say, if you sit there together and you look forward and say that relationship is what we want to both focus on as a
yeah,
team, then you've gone back to having that commonality that says we've got a shared goal here and it's
yeah,
our relationship. How
yeah,
can we both work together to make that work better? And that's a completely different perspective that can really help couples.
yeah.
Mm,
And it's, you know, for people who are in that position, I said we've all been there to some degree at some stage of our relationship, previous or current, whereby you either feel fed up, you may have got to that finality thinking, I'm done. Those questions about how did we get here? Why did we get here? And what's above all, bro, is this now position requires for complete openness and honesty. And that's why I said it goes back to those difficult conversation because if we're open and honest about what we're thinking, which is then causing how we feel, and then just carried out in our behavior, then the hard part's been dealt with, or we know
yeah.
where to go. But when we think, okay, and that's something I've seen in many couples whereby one person would just, I don't want to go there, or
Mm,
this is going to be a bomb, a hand grenade.
yeah.
But the hand grenade's still going to go off. But then
Yeah.
by then, you're both get exasperated. You don't want to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And I remember, Gary Chapman, who wrote, well, the five love languages. He
Yes, yeah, yeah.
wrote a book called Desperate Marriages. And he was influenced to write that book because a lady said to him, but what about marriages about like mine, marriages that are miserable? And
Mhm.
so many marriages and relationships are miserable. And there's sometimes an acceptance, okay, you know, the phrase, well, this is marriage. And it's like,
Mm.
no, it should be the best thing on earth, or a relationship should be the greatest thing. It's the person you're choosing to be
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's so true. Although I would put a caveat on that and say there will be times when it won't be the greatest thing on earth,
Of course.
because two people living together, sharing their lives together, who are not clones of each other, and if they are clones of each other, I can pretty much guarantee there's no real relationship or passion between them. Might be all right, mates, but
Yeah, yeah,
the passion comes from the opposites, comes from the
yes.
polarity of difference, and so we have to accept that there will be rocky times, but ultimately, yeah, none of us should be in a miserable relationship. I totally agree with that.
And that's where we feel that despair, you know, comes from. There's often pain or emptiness or frustration.
Mm,
And then you've not seen a way out. And it's the cost is the pain is harder staying in the relationship than leaving. That's what we may believe.
yeah,
And we know that any form of separation is comes with pain.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not saying it may not be the
100%.
right decision, but there's definitely going to be pain.
Yeah.
So as we start drawing to an end, what would you say from professional experience, and if you want personal, for those couples or individuals out there who are now thinking this then by, I'm contacting my solicitor tomorrow, or I need to let my partner know we cannot continue like this?
Mm. I think my thoughts on that are centered around, or the words "do it right" are coming to mind.
Do it
And
right.
what I mean by that is to pause and accept where you're at. And where you're at is at a point where you don't want the next 12 months to be the same as the last.
Yeah.
And ask yourselves, both people in that situation, do we want to do the work to figure out whether this is actually what we want? And if we don't, then do we want to do the work to still end well? Because I think the worst thing a couple can do is go down the right, I'm done, have a messy divorce, fall out with each other, take each other to the cleaners as much as they can, use the kids as weapons. All of those are the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And maybe the relationship is going to come to an end. Not every relationship can last, and not every relationship should last in that respect. But end well, end strong, end in a mature way. If you can afford therapy, then that's a really good place to start. If you can't, then maybe to your point, find someone that could kind of sit between you both initially. It is going to be about hard conversations. It's going to be about understanding how we got to where we got to. Because to answer the question, where do we go from here? I think we have to answer the question, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Because I've worked with couples where one of them was quite blindsided by the person saying, I'm done, which I always found interesting.
Yeah.
But I think some people can sit there in a relationship with a completely different viewpoint on how good or bad that relationship is, maybe completely different expectations about what they wanted anyway. So they're nowhere near as unhappy. And they didn't realize it was this bad, even though they were probably already told it was this bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So once more, comparing it to a work environment, if somebody's sacked, it shouldn't be a surprise.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you should have your written warnings right there
Yeah.
anyway. But yeah,
Or you know,
yeah,
okay, yeah, this was coming. It should not be. What are you talking about? Because it means
exactly.
that the
Exactly.
evidence doesn't justify the result.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, I totally agree with what you're saying. If that is the right way forward, then do it right in terms of separation, divorce. Coming from my perspective, I believe that the answers are there. The
Mm,
answers are there within that relationship.
mm,
And it's about having that safe space with the right person or people whereby we can look for those answers. Because there's problems, like in business. Every problem is a business opportunity. And what we're presenting now is an opportunity to address the problems that either been avoided or you weren't aware of.
yeah.
And you're looking for answers, but you just cannot find those answers. The only answer you can see is end.
Yeah,
and often it's not. So
absolutely.
I would say the action point for couples thinking about this or individuals I've done or where to go from there. First stage is, have you been honest with yourself? And
Mm.
have you done everything in this relationship to make it last? Because I'm not discounting separation or divorce, it has its place. But I say to couples and individuals, you will only have full peace going forward if you can say, I have done everything within my
100%.
power to make this relationship work.
Yeah,
And it's the same in business. Again, I repeat to myself because otherwise there's no freedom. And the
yeah.
freedom doesn't come from, oh, I'm not perfect, but they do this. So I'm
Mm,
leaving because they do this. And that's often the narrative.
mm.
Very few early to say, I didn't give my all. I didn't do this. I
Yeah,
didn't, you don't take accountability. So that would be the starting point. Second is in creating a safe space whereby to be able prepared to have that uncomfortable, difficult conversation with your partner, not coming from a place of I want to attack you, but this is where our relationship is at. And
mm,
you need to know, and we therefore need to then do something about it. And the third part is having in the mindset for the sake of the relationship. And I believe that if we're saying it for the sake of the relationship, as we mentioned before, bro, it removes the ego. And
yeah.
really, in a relationship, it should have a place for ego because we deny our ego to join with somebody else. But
Yes.
often it's like, I'm in a relationship for you to feed my ego, and it doesn't
Yeah,
work like
yeah. No, exactly. And you know, and all of those things, I mean, what you've just said is spot on. They're tough things to do. You know, that self-reflection, where what's my role in this? Have I given it my all? That's a very hard place for most people to go.
it did. But if that question is not addressed, whether it's in this relationship or future relationship, the same problems are going to arise.
100%. Yeah.
And I say in therapy, what's your role of a wife or what's your role of a partner? And it's like it's been the first time they've actually thought about that question. And
Yeah.
I say, you wouldn't accept a role at work unless you knew what the role was and what was expected of you. But we're blinded by love. I want to be with him or be
Yep.
with her. But what's your role?
Yeah.
What's expected from you?
100% that. There's a phrase I always loved, which is you always take you into the next relationship. And so if you was responsible for some failings in that first relationship, you is going to be responsible for similar failings in the next relationship. And they may not manifest as quickly or in the same way because everyone is different and responds differently. But ultimately, yeah, there's so much self-work, isn't there? When you're in this place, it's all about as much as you want to work on a relationship, work on you
Yeah,
because that's the bit you really can work on.
yeah,
And even if your partner's not in that place where they want to go for therapy or anything else, you
yeah,
can work on you.
yeah,
And I often would say, particularly if I was working with one person, I said, the only thing you can influence right now is you. You can't influence, well, you can't change them and you can't expect them to change. No one should ever expect change. But go to work on yourself and see whether that creates a change in how the person is responding to you. Because that's ultimately what is happening in a relationship. People are responding to each other. So you're not changing the other
yeah.
person, but you're changing their responses.
So key because as you're right, we cannot change anybody else, but we do influence. And at the start of a relationship, you find that you're adopting each other's words, mannerism,
Yes. Yeah.
behaviorism, because you're
Yeah.
influencing each other.
Yeah.
And that comes from you influencing the other person influencing you. So I totally agree with you, bro. As Nick said, the first point is being honest with yourself. How am I showing up? What am I doing and what am I not doing? Secondly, is working, finding a safe space whereby you and your partner can have uncomfortable, difficult, but very, very important conversation to identify how you've got here and also why. And then the third part is, right, from those conversations, what are we going to do to look for solutions to these problems? So you're not thinking of exit, you're thinking, right, have we explored all the possible solutions to address these problems in order for us to move forward? And only then, if you've done everything you can within your power or within a support network, then you can say, we've done everything. But most of the occasions, which I'm pleased to say, there is a turnaround.
Yeah.
There is a
Absolutely.
turnaround. And you think, wow, and you also learn from it that there is hope.
And I think, you know, couples need to remember, like you said, relationships are hard work, but nothing, I don't know why we think we can get into a relationship and it will just be okay. You know, we have to keep working on our bodies to stay fit and healthy.
Yeah.
We have to, at work, we have to stay on top of our work. We have to keep learning. We have to keep getting better. Otherwise, we get surpassed and
Yeah.
we retract. Nothing stays still in life.
Yeah.
You know, I think you're moving forward or you're falling backwards.
Yeah.
But in our relationships, we think, oh, I've got the perfect woman now, and my work here is done. And
Yeah.
we don't think about it as an ongoing process, ongoing work, ongoing education. How many people are educating themselves on how to get better at these things?
Yeah.
Very few. And that's really key. And that's the going to work on yourself, being honest with yourself perspective. One tip I'd love to leave with the listeners is when it comes to those conversations, there are so many resources out there. I've used some of them. They're basically relationship cards, conversation cards. You can find apps online. Happy to recommend some, but they provide some brilliant conversations for couples to have. And they can be in lots of different categories. Some of them are just getting to know each other better because you've probably very rarely sit down and have really good, deep conversations with your partner about things you didn't know about them.
Yeah.
And other things will be the tough ones where you're having to ask them, you know, what are the two things that I do that annoy you the most? Or,
Yeah.
you know, what is something? I heard a great one the other day. What is something that you feel like you've been telling me for years? In other words, what is leaving you feeling unlistened to, unheard? These are really tough questions, but those are the questions we need to be asking to
Yeah.
find out what's going on.
Yeah. Very
But
much so.
resources that are readily available to everyone, free, and that they'll make a difference.
And adding on to what you just said, Gary Chapman, which I speak about in every couple relationship, the five love languages, definitely advise you to Google it. It's very straightforward a concept and so effective in terms of understanding your own love language, what speaks to you, and also your partner's love language. And it could be something as simple as that, that the love
Absolutely.
language that you're communicating to your partner doesn't fulfill them, and vice versa.
100% agree, bro. And you know, people need to um, try and probably change their perspective. We go to the gym, we get a personal trainer.
Yeah.
But a lot of people still think if I got a relationship coach, a relationship counselor, a relationship therapist, I'd be embarrassed because everyone would know my relationship was in trouble.
Yeah.
It's the same concept. You're going to someone that knows more about relationships than you do, and you're asking them to give you some help, some coaching, some education. And I think the more we get down that path of
Yeah.
couples embracing that and
Yeah.
actually having it as part of their regular life,
Yeah.
once a month, checking in with this therapist to say, are we on track? The better relationships maybe would see. And I'm not saying that because of that's what I do, that's what you
Yeah.
do.
No. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
saying it because it makes sense based on
Yes.
approach every other aspect of our
Yeah.
life.
Well, bro, thank you for your time again. Great speaking with you.
Been a pleasure, bro. Thank you.